You'll either serve my wife or get out of my house. Those were my son's exact words, loud enough to shake the picture frames I once hung myself. I didn't argue. I didn't even blink. I just smiled, picked up my old leather suitcase, and walked out of the home I built brick by brick, the same home I once dreamed he'd inherit with pride. He thought he'd humiliated me, but what he really did was set something powerful in motion. What came next made the whole neighborhood talk. Subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. The moment I stepped back inside that house, it didn't feel like home anymore. The air was still thick with the scent of the cinnamon candles my late wife used to love, but the warmth that once lived there had turned into something sharp and unfamiliar. The gospel music that used to spill from the old radio every Sunday morning had been replaced by silence, an empty, heavy kind of quiet that made every creak in the floorboards sound like a ghost, remembering what laughter used to be. My daughter-in-law Shonda was sitting in my wife's recliner. That same recliner where my wife Loretta used to read her Bible before sunrise. Shonda's legs were crossed, one hand scrolling through her phone, the other waving at my son like she was conducting an orchestra. She didn't even look up when I came in. "Marcus, make sure you take those boxes to the garage," she said, her voice sharp as vinegar. "And tell your father not to clutter the entryway again." My son nodded without meeting my eyes. That was the part that cut the deepest. I stood there watching her lean back in that chair, the one with the small tear in the armrest where Loretta's wedding ring used to snag. My chest tightened. I'd kept that chair for her memory, not for someone else's comfort, but now it looked like an exhibit in a museum of things I no longer owned. On the bookshelf beside her, the family Bible sat right where Loretta had left it, open to Proverbs, her favorite passage about wisdom and pride. The sunlight hit it just right, the thin gold edge of the pages gleaming like it was alive. I could almost hear Loretta's voice whispering, "Let the fool show his colors and keep your peace." Shonda sighed loudly, tossing her phone on the coffee table like she owned the room. "Your father's things make this place look old," she said. "It's time we modernize." I caught the way my son shifted uncomfortably, but he didn't say a word. My heart didn't just break, it caved in on itself. This was the same boy who used to sit beside me at church, who'd squeeze my hand during the benediction, who'd once cried when his mother went into surgery. Now he couldn't even look me in the face. I tried to speak, but my voice came out low, almost a whisper. Loretta chose every piece of furniture in this room. I didn't say it for her sake. I said it for mine, to remind myself that this was once sacred ground. Shonda chuckled. "Well, bless her heart," she said. "But times change, and so does taste." The disrespect slid under my skin like ice water. I wanted to shout to tell her she was sitting in more than a chair, that she was sitting in the last piece of my wife's soul, but I didn't. I just looked around the room, memorizing every change, every intrusion. The photos of Loretta and me that once hung on the wall were stacked near the hallway, their frames face down, collecting dust. A new painting hung in their place, a bright, abstract mess that looked expensive and meant nothing. The kitchen smelled different, too. No cornbread baking, no slow-cooked greens simmering on the stove, no hint of Loretta's sweet tea with lemon slices floating on top. Instead, there was the scent of takeout boxes and synthetic vanilla from plug-in air fresheners. I could still hear Loretta's laughter echoing faintly like a memory refusing to die. I walked over to the window, the one overlooking the magnolia tree she planted on our 25th anniversary. The branches reached out like arms heavy with blossoms white and soft as cotton. For a moment, I almost thought I saw her reflection beside mine in the glass. Behind me, Shonda clapped her hands once. "Marcus, tell your father to move his old tools out of the shed. My brother's going to need the space for his business." I turned then, slowly. "Your brother?" I asked, my voice steady, almost too calm. "Yes," she said, smiling like this was a normal conversation. "He's starting a car detailing business. We offered him the garage. It's not like you're using it." My hands curled into fists. That garage wasn't just space. It was where I taught my son how to fix his first car, where I kept Loretta's garden tools, where every nail and hammer told the story of our lives. Marcus still wouldn't look at me. He just stood there, shoulders hunched like a child waiting for thunder. "It's just temporary, Dad," he muttered. "We'll figure it out." I nodded slowly, letting the silence stretch until it felt unbearable. Then I turned toward the door. "You do that," I said. Shonda's smirk widened, thinking she'd won something. But she hadn't. Not yet. Outside, the late afternoon sun hit the porch in long streaks of gold. The neighborhood was alive with familiar sounds, kids playing basketball down the street, Sister Evelyn watering her roses, a preacher's voice drifting faintly from an open window reciting, "Be still, and know that I am God." The world was still turning, even if my house had stopped feeling like mine. I sat down on the porch steps, the same steps where Loretta used to hand out lemonade to the neighbors every summer. I closed my eyes, breathing in the smell of magnolia and fresh-cut grass, letting the anger melt into something colder, quieter. I realized then that home isn't just wood and nails, it's memory, it's love, and it's respect. And when those are gone, what's left is just a shell. But even a shell can become a weapon in the right hands. I wasn't going to fight them with shouting or fists. I had something better: time, wisdom, and the patience of a man who's been underestimated his whole life. That night I sat alone at a diner off Jefferson Avenue, the kind of place that's been around since before anyone cared about decor or calories. The waitress poured my coffee without asking. She knew me. Everyone there did. They called me Mr. Harris, same as always. I looked around, blue neon lights buzzing, a jukebox playing an old Sam Cooke song, a couple of men from church at the counter nodding politely. For the first time in years, I felt something close to peace. When I got back to the motel where I was staying, I pulled out an old photo of Loretta, the one of her standing in the choir robe, smiling after Sunday service. "You always said the Lord sees everything," I whispered. "I guess it's my turn to see too." I opened my laptop and logged into my bank account. Every automatic payment tied to that house electricity insurance, even the property tax, was still under my name. I hovered over the buttons, my fingers steady. Loretta always said, "Never act in anger, baby. Act in purpose." So I did. I canceled them one by one, each click echoing in the quiet room like a hymn. By the time I was done, the night outside had deepened into that deep southern black where even the stars seemed to hold their breath. I leaned back in the chair, listening to the hum of the old ceiling fan. Somewhere out there in that house that used to be mine, the lights would soon flicker, the bills would come due, and the truth would start to crawl out from under all that arrogance. I didn't need to say a word. God and time would do the talking for me. And what happened next would make every Sunday whisper turn into a sermon. When my son looked me dead in the eye and said, "Our house, our rules," I swear the ground tilted beneath me. His voice was firm, rehearsed, even like he'd practiced that line in front of a mirror, just to make sure it cut deep enough. I stood there staring at him, wondering where the little boy I used to take to Sunday school went, the one who'd grip my hand so tight during the Lord's Prayer that I could feel his heartbeat in his palm. That same hand now rested on his hip, defiant, belonging to a man who'd forgotten who taught him how to stand tall in the first place. The room seemed to shrink, the walls closing in with the sound of the air conditioner humming like a warning. My chest felt tight, not from age, but from disappointment that ran deeper than any wound. "Our house," he said again, slower this time, as if to make sure I understood. The way he said it burned through me like I was some unwanted guest in a place I'd built with my own sweat. Every nail, every brick, every memory. Shonda stood behind him, her arms folded, her lips pursed in that smirk that told me this speech wasn't his idea. I knew her kind of quiet control, the way she'd been shaping him for years, soft words wrapped in sweet poison. My son was just too blind to see it. Her eyes glinted like polished steel when she added, "It's better this way, Daddy Harris. You can have your space, and we'll have ours." She called me Daddy Harris, the way people at the bank call you. Sir, polite, distant, meaningless. I could feel the pulse in my temple as I studied their faces, the perfect little alliance they'd built against me. The old me might have argued, might have thrown scripture at them, told them that honoring your father wasn't a suggestion, it was a commandment. But this version of me had learned the power of silence. I just nodded slowly and said, "All right." It wasn't surrender. It was the kind of calm that comes before a storm. The silence after that stretched like an open wound. My son shifted his weight uneasy with how easily I accepted his decree. Shonda reached for his arm, rubbing his shoulder like she was steadying him after a fight. "We're just trying to make this house work," she said, her tone dripping with fake sincerity. I could hear the TV playing softly in the background, some commercial for life insurance, a cruel bit of irony if there ever was one. I walked toward the mantel, tracing my fingers over the framed photos, family moments frozen in better times. There was one of Marcus at his high school graduation cap, crooked smile wide. Loretta had been so proud that day she cried through half the ceremony. I remembered her squeezing my hand, whispering, "He's got your stubbornness, you know." Back then it had sounded like a blessing. Now it felt like a curse. "Do you really mean this?" I asked. Not because I didn't know the answer, but because I wanted to hear him say it again, to carve the truth into my bones so I'd never forget it. He looked away for half a second, then back at me. "It's what's best for everyone," he said. "You deserve your own space." The words were wrapped in kindness, but the message was clear. You don't belong here anymore. For a moment, I felt every year of my age pressed down on me, the weight of fatherhood sacrifice and quiet dreams that had outlived their welcome. I thought of Loretta again, how she would have handled this. She wouldn't have cried. She would have straightened her back, looked our son dead in the eye, and said, "You can't erase blood. I wasn't her, but I carried her fire. It just burned quieter." So I stepped closer to him until we were eye to eye. He was taller now, broader, but I saw the flicker of that little boy still hiding behind his grown man bravado. "Son," I said softly one day, "when your boy looks at you the way you're looking at me right now, I hope you remember this moment." He swallowed hard, but didn't answer. The silence between us felt colder than any winter I'd ever known. Shonda broke it first. "Marcus, let's not make this harder than it has to be," she said. Her voice was steady, but her hand trembled just enough for me to notice. Maybe she knew the kind of storm she was stirring up. I turned toward the doorway, the afternoon light pouring in through the curtains like judgment. As I reached for my coat, I noticed something sitting on the console table, Loretta's old prayer journal. She used to write down names of people she prayed for every morning before breakfast. My son's name was on the first page, written in her elegant cursive. I picked it up and flipped to the last entry before she passed. There it was again. Marcus. Beside it in smaller letters, "Protect him from pride." I closed the journal and slipped it into my pocket. Some things weren't meant to be left behind. I turned back to them both standing there like kings and queens in a house full of ghosts, and I said, "I won't be a problem." That was the last thing I said before stepping out the door. Outside, the world was loud and alive, the neighbor's radio playing a Marvin Gaye song, a lawnmower buzzing somewhere down the block, kids chasing each other with water guns. It was almost funny how normal everything looked while my whole world was splitting in two. I walked to my truck, the same old Chevy I'd had since '98, and sat there for a long minute watching the house through the windshield. In that stillness, something inside me shifted. The hurt didn't fade, but it hardened, turned into something sharper. I wasn't leaving defeated. I was leaving awake. There's a dangerous kind of peace that comes when a man stops hoping for apologies. I turned the key in the ignition, and the engine roared like an old friend, reminding me I still had strength left. I drove without thinking, just following the road that wound through our neighborhood, the same streets I used to walk Marcus down when he was learning to ride a bike. I passed the church where Loretta and I were married, the park where Marcus took his first steps, all of it replaying like a film reel from another life. By the time I reached the outskirts of town, the sun had dipped low, painting the sky in bruised shades of orange and purple. I stopped at a red light near the old mill and saw my reflection in the rearview mirror. My eyes looked older, yes, but steadier too. The man staring back wasn't broken. He was recalculating. I thought about everything I'd built, everything I'd given, and realized something simple yet profound. Sometimes the only way to reclaim your peace is to let people destroy the illusion they built around you. The light turned green and I drove on the night, swallowing the road ahead. I didn't know exactly where I was going yet, but I knew one thing for sure: by the time I came back, that house, that pride, that arrogance, they'd all learned the true meaning of our rules. And what happened next would make that first ultimatum look like mercy. I packed my clothes slowly, folding each shirt with the precision of a man performing a ritual. The whispering from the kitchen drifted down the hallway like smoke, soft, poisonous, and meant for my ears. I could hear Shonda's voice, first clipped and sharp. "He'll manage, he always does." Then Marcus, quieter, uncertain. "Maybe we should help him find a place." "He'll figure it out," she replied, her tone dripping with finality. "It's time he learns to let go." The words sank deep, but I didn't flinch. The zipper of my old suitcase rasped through the silence, louder than thunder in that small hallway. That sound marked the end of something sacred, the final page of a book I never thought I'd stop reading. Every creak of the floorboards under my feet carried memories. The night Loretta and I moved in, laughing as we argued about where the couch should go. The mornings Marcus came running down these same halls, still wearing his pajamas, asking if pancakes were ready. And now just echoes, hollow, distant, fading like a hymn after the congregation's gone home. I took my time, not because I needed it, but because it felt wrong to rush. I wanted to leave with grace, not bitterness. My hands brushed the edge of the dresser where Loretta's perfume bottle still stood half full. I twisted the cap open just once, letting the scent of jasmine and honey fill the room. It hit me hard like a wave from another life. For a second I could almost hear her humming from the kitchen that same tune she used to sing while making Sunday dinner. But the house was quiet now, too quiet. I placed the bottle gently back on the dresser, then reached for the picture frame beside it. It was a photo of us, Loretta and me, standing outside the church after choir practice, her hand resting on my shoulder. The corner of the frame was cracked, but her smile still shone like sunlight through stained glass. I slipped the photo into my jacket pocket. Some things weren't meant to be left behind. When I stepped into the living room, they stopped talking. Marcus pretended to check his phone, and Shonda busied herself wiping an already clean counter. The tension was thick enough to choke on. My suitcase handle squeaked as I lifted it, the sound cutting through the silence like a blade. Shonda finally spoke, her voice syrupy and cold. "You sure you don't want to stay for dinner, Daddy Harris? We're making roast." The way she said it, like I was a stranger being offered leftovers, made my stomach turn. I just shook my head. "No need. I've already had my fill." Marcus finally looked up, guilt flickering in his eyes. "Dad," he started, but I raised a hand to stop him. "Save it, son," I said, not unkindly. "The Lord sees what's said and what's not. That's enough for me." His lips parted, but no words came out. I could tell he wanted to say something, maybe sorry, maybe nothing at all. But the moment passed before it ever began. The front door loomed ahead of me like a finish line I hadn't asked to cross. I paused just long enough to glance at the family Bible sitting on the coffee table. Loretta's handwriting still marked the margins in blue ink, tiny notes, prayers, reminders. My throat tightened. I wanted to take it with me, but no. Let them read it. Maybe someday the words would find their way into their hearts. As I opened the door, the cold evening air rushed in, brushing against my face like a blessing and a warning all at once. The neighborhood was calm, crickets humming, the streetlight flickering at the corner, a dog barking in the distance. I stood there for a moment, listening to the rhythm of a world that hadn't taken sides. I didn't look back. You can't drive forward staring in the rearview mirror. When I reached the porch, I caught sight of Sister Evelyn next door watering her azaleas. She looked up, startled. "Mr. Harris, you heading out this late?" she asked. I forced a small smile. "Just need some air, sister." Her eyes softened. She didn't ask more. Folks in our community know when not to pry. She nodded once, and that was enough, a silent blessing from someone who understood loss in her own way. I walked to my truck, the gravel crunching under my shoes. The sky was turning the color of dark velvet, and the first stars were peeking through. I loaded the suitcase into the bed of the pickup and stood for a moment, resting my hands on the tailgate. My palms were rough, calloused, marked by years of labor. Those same hands had built that house, fixed its roof, mended its walls, paid every damn bill. And yet inside I'd been made to feel like a guest. I started the engine, the deep rumble breaking the stillness. The headlights flared across the front of the house, catching Marcus in the doorway. He stood there, one hand gripping the frame, looking smaller than I remembered. I didn't wave. I didn't need to. The message was already written between us. This was the consequence of pride. As I pulled away, the house grew smaller in the rearview mirror until it disappeared behind the trees. The road stretched out ahead, empty and endless. Somewhere down that road I'd find peace again. Maybe not tonight, maybe not tomorrow, but I'd find it. I drove past the church, its steeple glowing faintly under the streetlight. I slowed down just long enough to glance at the stained glass window. Loretta loved the one depicting the prodigal son returning home. I almost laughed at the irony. The story went one way in Scripture, but in real life it was often the parents who had to leave to keep their dignity. By the time I reached the highway, the city lights had vanished behind me, replaced by the dark stretch of country road. I rolled down the window, letting the cool night air wash over me. The radio crackled, catching the tail end of an old blues song. The singer's voice was weary but strong, the kind of sound that carries the weight of every heartbreak and still keeps walking. I knew that feeling. When I finally pulled into the small motel by the interstate, the neon sign buzzed faintly overhead, vacancy flickering in red. The clerk didn't ask questions, just handed me a key room 7 and wished me a good night. Inside the room smelled of old carpet and cleaning supplies. I set the suitcase down and sat on the edge of the bed. For the first time in years I was truly alone. No voices, no judgments, no shadows of expectation, just quiet. I reached into my pocket and pulled out Loretta's photo. The motel light made the edges of her smile glow soft and warm. "I did it, baby," I whispered. I walked away. The tears came then, not loud or messy, just slow, steady like rain on a tin roof. I let them fall. It wasn't weakness. It was release. Then, somewhere between exhaustion and peace, a strange calm settled over me. The kind of calm that comes when a man knows he's crossed a line he can't uncross and doesn't regret it. Tomorrow would bring decisions, maybe even revenge, but tonight belonged to silence and survival. I lay back, staring at the ceiling fan turning slow circles. The Lord saw everything that mattered. He saw the truth behind every smile, the pain behind every choice. And I knew in my bones that the story wasn't over yet. Not even close. The motel was the kind of place you stop at when you've run out of destinations but not determination. The wallpaper peeled at the corners. The hum of the vending machine outside the door was steady as a heartbeat, and the air conditioner rattled like it was holding on to its last breath. I sat by the window, the one with a view of the empty parking lot, a neon sign flickering half-lit letters, OTL. It felt fitting. Half of my old life had already burned out. The Bible lay open beside me, pages worn from years of prayer and grief, while the glow from my laptop screen lit the room in pale blue light. I wasn't a man of modern habits, but decades of construction work, property deals, and careful saving had taught me more about numbers than most college graduates. My son never paid attention when I tried to teach him that lesson. He thought his father's wisdom ended at a hammer and a hard day's work. He was about to learn just how wrong he was. I stared at the bank dashboard for a long moment. My name glowed in bold letters at the top. Joint accounts, property titles, trust funds, things he didn't even know existed because I'd always planned to give them to him one day when he was ready. Turns out that day had already passed, and he'd failed the test before he even knew he was taking it. The cursor blinked at me, patient and merciless. I whispered a prayer under my breath. Lord, give me the strength to do this right, not out of anger, but out of justice. Then I started making the calls. The first voice on the other end was a young banker who spoke like he was reading from a script. "Good evening, Mr. Harris. How can I assist you today?" "You can start," I said evenly, "by stopping every automatic payment tied to 1842 Belmont Street." There was a pause. "That's your primary residence, sir. Would you like to—" It was I cut in. "Not anymore." I could almost see the confusion on his face through the phone line. "Understood, sir. Canceling all automatic payments now." One by one, I heard him confirm the list: electricity, insurance, property tax, internet, all of it. Each confirmation was a quiet nail sealing the coffin of my son's comfort. When I hung up, the silence in the room shifted. It wasn't heavy like before. It was clean, sharp, purposeful. I opened a new tab on the laptop and started reviewing the other accounts: my construction business, the rental properties, the small cabin by Lake Juniper that no one knew about but me and Loretta. That place had always been our escape, a sanctuary of still water and old pine trees. I decided that would be mine again. As I worked, I thought of Marcus. I thought of the boy who used to ride on my shoulders during the church picnic, shouting that he could see the whole world from up there. And then I thought of the man who'd stood in my living room days ago saying, "Our house, our rules." That boy had been raised in love. The man had been raised by entitlement. Somewhere between those two moments, I had failed him. But maybe this was the only way to teach him again through consequence. Outside, a semi-truck roared down the highway, its headlights flashing across the ceiling. For a moment, the room filled with moving light, then darkness again. I took a deep breath and leaned back in the chair, feeling the ache in my shoulders ease just slightly. It wasn't revenge I felt. It was release. I clicked through the business files one more time, verifying that every asset tied to me was secure. Then, almost on instinct, I opened a folder labeled Legacy. It held scanned copies of old deeds, contracts, and a letter I'd written years ago but never sent. It was addressed to Marcus. The subject line was simple: "For when I'm gone." I opened it, and the words I'd written hit harder than I remembered. "Son, everything I built was meant to become yours, but only if you knew how to protect it, not take it for granted." I smiled bitterly. He'd have to earn that lesson the hard way now. My phone buzzed on the table. A message from an unknown number. "Dad, we need to talk." I stared at the screen, unmoving. He didn't call me Dad much anymore, always Pop or Old Man when he wanted something. But Dad, that meant he'd started to feel the edges of the storm. I let the phone buzz again, then go silent. Some lessons required distance. I closed the laptop and picked up the Bible. The passage still open was from Proverbs: "A fool despises his father's instruction, but he who heeds reproof is prudent." I ran my finger over the verse and whispered, "Lord, let him learn even if it hurts." A knock came at the door just then, 2 short taps, hesitant. I tensed for a second, half expecting Marcus to be standing there ready to throw apologies that would sound too much like excuses. But when I opened it, it was the motel clerk, a thin young man with tired eyes. "Sorry to bother you, sir," he said. "You left your wallet at the desk." He handed it to me with a nervous smile. "You traveling far?" "Not far enough," I said. He nodded like he understood, even if he didn't. After he left, I walked outside and stood on the small concrete walkway, the cool night wrapping around me like a familiar coat. The highway lights stretched in both directions, endless and humming. I thought about calling Sister Evelyn from church, asking her to tell the pastor I'd be gone for a while. But then I realized I didn't owe anyone an explanation. When I went back inside, the air felt lighter. I poured myself a cup of motel coffee, weak, bitter, but hot. I sat by the window again, watching a moth beat itself against the glass, drawn to a light it couldn't reach. That was Marcus, I thought, always chasing comfort, never realizing it would burn him. I opened the notebook I'd started keeping the night Loretta passed away. The first page held her handwriting, a small note she'd left me the morning before her final surgery. "If something ever happens to me, Promise me you'll keep your faith and your temper separate." I traced the words with my thumb. "I'm trying, baby," I whispered. "But he's testing both." Hours passed before I noticed the first hint of dawn creeping through the curtains. The light was soft and gold, the kind that makes even the ugliest places look tender for a moment. I closed the notebook, stood, and stretched the stiffness from my back. It was time to move. I packed my Bible laptop and the photo of Loretta into the suitcase, zipped it shut, and placed it by the door. Then I looked back at the room one last time. It wasn't much, but it had given me clarity. It had given me the stillness to think like the man I used to be before hurt clouded my vision. As I stepped outside, the sun broke over the horizon, painting the highway in warm orange light. The wind carried the faint smell of diesel and dust. I took a deep breath and smiled. My next move wouldn't be loud, but it would be felt. I'd built empires from dirt before. This time, I'd build peace, and make sure every lesson my son refused to learn came back to meet him one bill at a time. I climbed into my truck, turned the key, and drove toward Lake Juniper. The road stretched out endless and clean. Behind me was the wreckage of pride. Ahead was purpose. And before this story was done, Marcus would come to understand exactly what kind of man he'd tried to cast aside. By the next Sunday, the story had already outrun me. I didn't have to say a word. My son's choices had become the congregation's latest sermon. The whispers started before service even began, low and sharp, slicing through the sanctuary like wind through wheat. "Did you hear what Marcus did to his father?" one voice hissed near the aisle. "Ran him right out of his own house." Another whispered back. I sat 3 pews from the front, Bible in hand, head bowed like I hadn't heard a thing. But I heard every word. Every syllable carried both shame and satisfaction. The choir was warming up, voices rising in hallelujahs that echoed against the stained glass. I could feel eyes on me, pity mixed with reverence, the kind of attention a man doesn't ask for but can't avoid. Sister Evelyn sat beside me, her perfume heavy with gardenia, her hand resting softly on mine. "You hold your head high, Mr. Harris," she whispered. "The Lord sees." I nodded once more, grateful than I could say. The Lord saw, yes, but so did everyone else now. When Pastor Graham took the pulpit, the room fell silent. He was a big man with a voice that could shake the rafters when he wanted to, but that morning he spoke soft. "Family," he began, his eyes sweeping over the congregation. "We often talk about forgiveness, but today I want to talk about respect, especially for those who paved the way before us." My stomach tightened. He didn't call names, but he didn't have to. Every head in that church turned slightly toward me, like I was some living parable sitting among them. After service, I tried to slip out quietly, but the crowd followed me like bees to honey. Deacon Cole slapped my shoulder and said, "You handled it right, brother. Quiet strength. That's how men of faith do it." Then came the neighbors, people I hadn't seen in months, offering hugs, casseroles, and sympathy disguised as curiosity. "You staying out by the lake now?" one asked. "Heard you finally took a break from all that noise." I smiled, letting them fill in the blanks with whatever version of the story made them sleep easier. By evening, the whispers had turned into full-blown testimony. The women's group was buzzing with talk. The men at the barbershop were shaking their heads. I knew because Deacon's wife, always 3 steps ahead of gossip, called to tell me. "It's all over town, Mr. Harris. Folks saying your boy's lost his way." I thanked her politely, hung up, and sat on the porch of my cabin at Lake Juniper. The air was cool and heavy with the scent of pine and water. The ripples on the lake caught the last gold of sunset, smooth and endless. I took a deep breath. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't angry, just sad. Sad that it had to come to this for the truth to find daylight. I poured myself a glass of sweet tea and let the quiet work on me. In our community, news travels faster than gospel music. And unlike the gospel people, love a scandal more than salvation. But this time, the scandal worked in my favor. Folks who'd once looked at Marcus with pride now looked at him with pity. He'd strutted around town like a man who'd inherited a kingdom. Now the same kingdom was slipping through his fingers and everyone could see it. 2 days later, I stopped by the church office to drop off a donation for the youth choir. The secretary, a young woman named Tasha, smiled nervously as I handed her the envelope. "Pastor says he'd like to see you," she said. I followed her to his office, where Pastor Graham was waiting behind his desk, Bible-open glasses perched low on his nose. "Brother Harris," he said, rising to shake my hand, "I just wanted to tell you I admire your grace. Not every man could walk away with his head high after what happened." I met his gaze evenly. "Grace isn't weakness, Pastor. Sometimes it's just patience wearing its Sunday best." He chuckled, then leaned back. "Amen to that." Before I left, he said, "Your boy's been calling me, asking for counsel." That caught me off guard. "He's lost," Pastor Graham added softly, "but he's starting to see the road back." I didn't answer right away. The thought of Marcus sitting in that office squirming under the same man who'd taught us both about humility stirred something complicated inside me. Half anger, half hope. "If he's truly seeking," I said finally, "then the Lord will meet him halfway." Back at the cabin, I found a letter tucked under the screen door. No envelope, just a folded piece of paper with my name scrawled across it. The handwriting was Marcus's, shaky and rushed. I sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where Loretta and I used to eat breakfast, watching the fog roll off the lake. The letter was short. "Dad, I heard what folks are saying. I know I messed up. Shonda's gone to stay with her sister. I didn't think it would all fall apart this fast. I just wanted to talk. Maybe we could meet." I read it twice, then laid it beside the Bible. My hands trembled slightly, not from weakness, but from something deeper. Years of holding too much in. I didn't call him back, not yet. I needed time. Forgiveness, I'd learned, isn't a door you can force open. It creaks on its hinges, and it only moves when the heart's ready. That night, as the moon rose over the water, the sound of crickets filled the air. The phone rang again. This time it was Sister Evelyn. "Baby, they were talking about you again at choir rehearsal," she said. "Everyone's saying how proud Loretta would be. You handled it with class." I smiled into the receiver. "Thank you, sister. Loretta taught me well." After I hung up, I looked out over the lake, the water silver under the moonlight. I thought about the boy I'd raised, the man he'd become, and the community that had now turned into his mirror. Pride had always been a loud teacher, but humiliation could whisper lessons straight to the soul. The phone buzzed one more time. A text from Marcus. Just 5 words. "Can I come see you?" I stared at it for a long moment. Somewhere deep down, I felt Loretta's voice, soft as ever. "Don't let bitterness win, baby. Let time do its work." I didn't reply, not yet. I needed him to sit in the silence a while longer to feel what it was like when the whole world stopped applauding and started watching. I walked back outside the porch, boards creaking under my feet. Fireflies danced over the grass, flickering like tiny lanterns of forgiveness, lighting a path that neither of us was ready to walk. But I knew this wasn't the end of the story. It never is, not when blood and pride are tangled this tight. The world had started to see the truth, but the truth, as I was about to learn, wasn't finished revealing itself. The call came just after sunrise. I was sitting on the porch of the cabin, coffee in hand, watching the mist crawl off the lake like smoke, when my banker's voice cut through the quiet. "Mr. Harris, I just wanted to confirm the loan documents you sent over." I frowned. "What documents?" There was a pause on the other end, the kind that carries the weight of bad news. "The home equity loan on your property in Belmont," he said carefully. "We received a signature under your name yesterday." I didn't speak for a long moment. My eyes were still on the lake, but the reflection staring back at me no longer looked calm. It looked dangerous. When I hung up, the coffee had gone cold. I went inside, sat at the table, and pulled out the laptop. There it was, the electronic copy of the loan, the forged signature at the bottom. My own son's attempt at turning what was left of my legacy into his personal safety net. I'd known pride could blind him, but I hadn't realized it could make him a thief. The air in the cabin felt thinner, the walls closer. For a moment I thought I might break something just to feel it shatter. Instead, I closed my eyes and whispered, Lord, give me control over my hands because my heart's already on fire. I'd spent my life fixing what other men broke. Houses, engines, marriages, even the faith of a few friends who'd lost their way. But this was beyond repair. This was betrayal signed in ink. I drove into town before noon. The road hummed beneath the tires, every mile sharpening my focus. The courthouse sat heavy in the middle of downtown, an old brick building with a flag fluttering tiredly above it. I walked straight through the doors, nodding to the clerk at the desk. "I'm here to file an eviction," I said. Her eyebrows lifted, probably expecting some landlord fed up with late rent, not a father fed up with disappointment. She handed me the paperwork, her voice polite and detached. Name of tenant. I hesitated just long enough to taste the bitterness of the word before I said it. Marcus Harris. Filling out those forms felt like hammering nails into the coffin of what used to be family. My pen didn't tremble, though. Every stroke was steady. The law, for once, would be my sermon. When I left the courthouse, the air was hot and heavy thunder rolling somewhere in the distance. I stood on the steps looking out at the town I'd helped build piece by piece, house by house. I'd repaired roofs for half these people, volunteered at the food drive, donated pews to the church when they couldn't afford new ones. But now, it wasn't their judgment I feared, it was their pity. I didn't want anyone to see me as a father cleaning up his son's mess. I wanted them to see me as a man reclaiming what was his. That evening, the first drops of rain hit the cabin roof. I called my lawyer, an old friend named Harold who'd known me since before Marcus was born. "I'll handle it quietly," he said after a long pause. "But are you sure you want to go this route?" "He's your boy." I let out a slow breath. He stopped being my boy when he decided to become a con artist. Harold didn't argue. Some truths don't need defending. The rain turned to a downpour, drumming against the tin roof like judgment. I poured myself a drink and sat by the window watching the storm tear through the trees. In the flash of lightning, I saw the magnolia tree from my old yard in my mind's eye, the one Loretta planted with our son's help. I wondered what she'd say if she were here. Probably something like, "You can't save a man who's busy digging his own grave." She was always blunt that way. The next morning, I drove back into town to meet Harold. The paperwork was ready. He slid the folder across his desk. "Once it's served, he'll have 30 days to vacate," he said. "Do you want me to notify him personally?" I shook my head. "No. He needs to hear it from me." Harold studied me for a moment. "This won't be easy." "Nothing worth doing ever is," I said. By the time I reached Belmont Street, the afternoon sun was glaring against the hood of my truck. The house stood there like a stranger wearing my clothes. The curtains were different. The flowers replaced the porch stripped of the wind chimes Loretta loved. Shonda's SUV sat in the driveway. I parked, turned off the engine, and sat for a long time listening to the ticking of the cooling motor. When I finally walked up to the door, I didn't knock gently. Shonda opened it, surprise flickering across her face before it hardened. "Mr. Harris," she said, all politeness and poison. "To what do we owe the pleasure?" I held the envelope up between us. "You might want to call your husband," I said. Her smile faltered. "What is this, an eviction notice?" I said. 30 days. Her jaw dropped. "You can't be serious. You're evicting your own son." "No," I said evenly. "I'm evicting a tenant who forged my name and tried to steal my home. The son I raised would never have done that." The sound of footsteps came from the hallway, and then Marcus appeared, his face pale. "Dad, what is this?" he asked, already knowing. I handed him the second copy. "It's accountability, son. Something you've been avoiding for a long time." For a second I thought he'd shout. His mouth opened-closed, then opened again. "I was going to pay it back," he said weakly. "It was just a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding doesn't require my signature," I said. "And theft doesn't need forgiveness, it needs consequences." Shonda muttered something under her breath, but I didn't even look at her. My eyes stayed on Marcus. "You've got 30 days. Use them to decide who you want to be." I turned to leave, but Marcus grabbed my arm. His hand was shaking. "Dad, please. Don't do this. I looked down at his grip, familiar but foreign, and gently pulled away. You did this, I said. Then I walked out into the blazing sun, my shoes crunching against the gravel. Driving away, I felt a strange calm settle over me, heavier than peace, but lighter than rage. The storm had passed, and all that was left was clarity. I wasn't punishing him. I was setting him free from entitlement, from excuses, from the illusion that love means never facing the truth. Back at the cabin, I placed the eviction copy beside the Bible on the table. The rain had stopped, and through the open window came the smell of wet earth and pine. I poured another coffee, stronger this time, and whispered, "Thank you, Lord. I did what I had to." The wind picked up, carrying the faint sound of church bells from miles away. I listened for a moment, then smiled. Justice didn't always come fast, but it always came sure. I didn't know what would happen next, not exactly. But I did know this: the same people who whispered my shame last month would soon be whispering his. And what unfolded after that would make even the most loyal tongues in town go quiet. It started with a single phone call, and by the end of the week, Marcus's name was on every tongue in town. The creditors came first. 3 of them dressed in suits too stiff for our kind of heat. They knocked on his door just as the church bells were ringing for Wednesday prayer service. Neighbors watched from their porches, pretending to sweep or water plants, while the men delivered the news: the loan was fraudulent, the paperwork forged, and the investigation had begun. By nightfall, the truth had spread faster than a sermon gone wrong. The same people who once admired my son's confidence now whispered about his downfall. He forged his own father's name, they said in disbelief, and for what? A bigger house, a fancier car. The gossip rolled through the community like thunder, and for the first time I didn't flinch at the sound of my name being attached to it. Truth, when it finally walks into a room, doesn't ask for permission to be heard. That Sunday, the church was packed tighter than usual. I could feel the tension before I even stepped inside, the air thick with curiosity, pity, and judgment. The choir sang softer that morning, as if the weight of Marcus's sin had found its way into every note. When I walked down the aisle, the whispers quieted, eyes darting away. I took my usual seat near the front, Bible in hand, and let their silence wash over me like a benediction. Pastor Graham cleared his throat, his voice steady but laced with disappointment. Today, he said, we are reminded that pride goeth before destruction. He didn't have to say Marcus's name. Every head turned slightly toward me, every eye filled with the same mix of sorrow and respect. I didn't bow my head this time. I looked straight ahead, calm and steady. I wasn't ashamed anymore. I'd done my part. The rest belonged to God and consequence. After the service, the church mothers gathered near the front steps, their fans flapping like wings in the heat. "It's a shame," one murmured. "A fine young man gone astray." Another shook her head, her voice low but firm. "The devil's favorite tool is pride, child. Always has been." I didn't interrupt. I didn't defend him either. The truth didn't need my protection anymore. It stood taller on its own than any excuse ever could. Over the next few days, the fallout grew heavier. Shonda's family packed up their things and moved out of town without a word. The new car was repossessed. The house, my house, was stripped of everything shiny they'd tried to hide behind. It looked hollow again, the way greed always leaves a place once it's had its fill. I drove by only once, slow and quiet, the windows down, the wind carrying the sound of emptiness through the yard. Marcus was sitting on the porch, head in his hands, shoulders slumped, like a man who'd finally realized how heavy his crown of arrogance had been. I didn't stop. I wasn't ready yet. Forgiveness isn't a switch you flip, it's a road you walk barefoot. It cuts. It burns. But you walk it anyway when the time's right. Back at the cabin, peace had a sound I'd almost forgotten: the hum of cicadas in the trees, the soft splash of water against the dock, the creak of the rocking chair Loretta used to sit in. I spent my evenings there, Bible on one side, a glass of tea on the other. The world finally quiet enough for me to hear my own thoughts. It wasn't triumph I felt. It wasn't revenge either. It was something quieter, something cleaner. A kind of peace that doesn't announce itself, but simply settles into your bones and reminds you that you've survived what was meant to break you. One evening, as the sun melted into the lake and the air turned gold, Pastor Graham stopped by. He stood at the edge of the porch, hat in hand, eyes soft with something like understanding. "He's been coming to church again," he said. "Sits in the back. Doesn't say much." I nodded, keeping my gaze on the horizon. "That's a start," I said. "Sometimes silence is the best confession." He sighed. "You taught him well, brother, even if it took the hard way to show." I gave a small laugh. Seems that's the only way some men learn. After he left, I stayed on the porch until the stars came out. The world felt balanced again, not perfect, but fair. Justice had done its work without my hand forcing it. Marcus's lies had undone themselves, tangled in their own knots. All I had to do was stand still and let the truth breathe. The next morning I found an envelope slipped under the door. It wasn't marked, but I knew his handwriting the moment I saw it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. "Dad, I don't expect you to forgive me, but I'm trying to find my way back. I'm sorry." I read it once, folded it carefully, and placed it in the Bible between Psalms and Proverbs. Not out of sentimentality, but because that's where wisdom lives, between pain and praise. The days that followed felt lighter. The townsfolk had moved on to fresher gossip, the whispers replaced by nods of respect whenever I passed. Some would stop to say things like, "You handled that with grace, Mr. Harris," or "You set an example for us all." I didn't need their praise, but I accepted their handshakes, their kind words, their casseroles. Community heals itself in small ways. One afternoon, as I walked through town to pick up lumber for repairs at the cabin, I saw Marcus across the street. He looked older, thinner, humbled in a way that no sermon could ever achieve. Our eyes met briefly. He didn't wave, and I didn't smile. But for a heartbeat, there was understanding, two men standing on opposite sides of consequence. Then he lowered his gaze and walked on. That night I stood at the edge of the lake again, the water dark and still beneath the moonlight. I thought about Loretta, about how she'd probably have already forgiven him. She always said, "A father's love doesn't vanish, it just waits for wisdom to catch up." Maybe she was right. Maybe this was what waiting looked like. As the wind rippled across the surface of the lake, I realized I wasn't angry anymore. The ache had dulled into something gentler, a kind of mercy I didn't know I still had in me. I'd fought for justice, and it had come. Not in fire, not in fury, but in quiet truth. I turned off the porch light and headed inside, the sound of crickets following me in. The world had gone still again, but I knew peace doesn't last forever. Life has a way of testing it just when you start to trust it. And I could feel it in my bones. Something else was coming, something that would make even this reckoning look small. It was the first Sunday I'd missed in months, but I was there anyway, sitting in the back row with my hat pulled low. I didn't want anyone to know I'd come, not out of pride, but because some truths need to be witnessed, not participated in. The morning light filtered through the stained glass, washing the congregation in colors that looked like mercy and judgment all at once. The choir hummed softly, the kind of hymn that holds its breath before something important. I could feel it in my bones. Today was going to change everything. When the pastor took the pulpit, he spoke gently, almost like he was afraid to stir the air too much. "Before we begin," he said, "someone has something to share." A murmur rippled through the pews, curious, cautious. And then from the front row she stood up, Shonda, my son's wife. Her hands trembled as she smoothed her dress, but her eyes were clear. The same woman who once sat in my wife's recliner barking orders like a queen in her castle now looked small, human. She stepped toward the pulpit, every click of her heels echoing through the church like a confession. For a moment she couldn't speak. The silence stretched so long that even the ceiling fan seemed to stop spinning. Then she took a deep breath and said, "I owe this congregation the truth." My chest tightened. Her voice cracked at first, but it found its strength quickly. For months my husband and I let everyone believe things that weren't true. We let pride turn blessings into burdens. We made his father, the man who built our home, who paid for our education, who gave us everything we have, look like a villain. The air changed. You could feel the weight of her words pressing on every person in that room. Heads began to turn. A few people gasped quietly. Others bowed their heads. She kept going, her voice trembling but steady. When I married Marcus, I thought I was marrying into wealth. I thought I deserved comfort. I didn't understand what sacrifice looked like until I saw what we'd done to him. We took his generosity and called it ours. We took his patience and called it weakness. And when he finally walked away, we told ourselves we were right. Her hand went to her chest, and for a second I thought she might collapse under the truth she was carrying. The pastor moved closer, steadying her with a gentle nod, but she shook her head. "No," she said. "I need to finish this." And then it came the part that cut through the last of my resentment like sunlight breaking through a storm. "Mr. Harris," she said, her voice trembling, "paid for our wedding when Marcus couldn't. He paid off my student loans when I was drowning in debt. He bought the house we live in outright so his grandchildren would never have to worry about a roof over their heads. And how did we repay him? By calling him a burden." Her tears came then, slow and silent, but no one moved. No one dared to. The church mothers who once gossiped about me now sat frozen, their fans still in their laps. Even Pastor Graham's face had gone pale. There was no sermon that could compete with this. I didn't move either. I couldn't. My throat felt tight, my heart too loud. I hadn't come for an apology, and I sure hadn't come for redemption. I'd come because something deep in my spirit told me I needed to see this moment with my own eyes. Not as proof of my righteousness, but as confirmation that truth, real truth, doesn't need revenge to be heard. Marcus stood up then slowly from his seat beside her. His face was pale, his hands shaking. For the first time in years, I saw the boy he used to be, the one who sang off-key in the church choir, the one who cried when he scraped his knee. He turned toward the congregation, then toward me. "Dad," he said, his voice breaking. Just that one word. It carried everything he couldn't say. All the regret, the guilt, the love buried under layers of pride. I was wrong. The words hung there in the air, raw and fragile. He didn't try to justify himself, didn't list excuses or shift blame. He just stood there, stripped of all the arrogance that had once built walls between us. I wanted to stand to go to him, but my legs wouldn't move. Instead, I closed my eyes. I could feel Loretta's presence then, soft, steady, forgiving. She'd been right all along. She always said, "You can't rush grace. It arrives when it's meant to." When I opened my eyes, I saw that the congregation had risen to their feet. No one spoke, no applause, no judgment. Just silence, the kind of silence that feels holy, that holds space for both grief and gratitude. Shonda stepped down from the pulpit, her eyes red but clear. She didn't look for sympathy. She just walked back to her seat, her shoulders lighter, as if confession had given her wings. Marcus sat beside her, his head bowed, his hand finding hers. I left before the benediction, not out of anger, but because I needed the air. Outside, the sun was blazing high, the church bell ringing behind me, each toll cutting through the heat like truth through a lie. I walked to my truck slowly, my breath steady. For the first time in years, the weight on my chest was gone. I drove back toward Lake Juniper with the windows down, the wind whipping through the cab, the scent of magnolia drifting in. It smelled like forgiveness. It smelled like Loretta. Back at the cabin, I sat on the porch and watched the water shimmer under the afternoon sun. The world looked different. Not brighter, not cleaner, just real again. I reached into my Bible and pulled out Marcus's letter, the one I'd tucked between Psalms and Proverbs. I unfolded it, read it again, and smiled. It no longer felt like a wound. It felt like closure. The sound of tires crunching on gravel pulled me from my thoughts. I looked up to see Marcus's old sedan slowing to a stop near the edge of the driveway. He stepped out, hesitant but determined. Behind him, Shonda carried a basket. From the porch, I could see a loaf of bread wrapped in cloth, a jar of honey, and a folded envelope sitting on top. They walked toward me, not saying a word. When they reached the steps, Marcus met my eyes. "Dad," he said softly, "we came to return what's yours." I nodded slowly, the corners of my mouth lifting just enough to show it wasn't anger that lived there anymore. "Keep the bread," I said. "You'll need it for the road ahead." He swallowed hard. "And the rest?" I looked past him at the road that led back toward town, the church steeple still visible in the distance. "That," I said quietly, "we'll talk about next Sunday." The air between us held something new, not bitterness, not pride, but peace. The kind of peace you don't fight for, the kind you earn by letting go. And as the sun sank behind the pines, painting the lake in shades of fire and forgiveness, I realized this wasn't revenge. It never had been. It was revelation. And the story wasn't over yet, not even close. It was late autumn when I finally made the decision. The house on Belmont Street had sat empty for months, its windows dark, its walls stripped of laughter and lies alike. The grass had grown wild, reclaiming the yard the way truth reclaims dignity once pride steps aside. I drove there one last time, the sky heavy with clouds, the air smelling of rain and redemption. When I turned the key in the lock, the door groaned open like it had been waiting for me. The rooms were silent now. No shouting, no footsteps, no scent of perfume that didn't belong, just dust and echoes. I walked through slowly, my boots leaving faint prints on the hardwood. Loretta's old chair was still there, faded, frayed at the edges, but standing strong the same way she always did. I sat in it, feeling the ghost of her presence beside me. "We built this place with love," I whispered. "Now it's time to let it do some good again." The next day, I met with the director of a local veterans housing program. He was a young man, maybe late 30s, with sleeves rolled to his elbows, and a handshake that felt like gratitude. His name was David. He'd served in Iraq, now dedicated his life to giving struggling veterans a roof and a second chance. "Mr. Harris," he said, glancing at the deed I'd signed, "this'll mean more than you know." "You sure about this?" I nodded. "I'm sure," I said. "That house was built on sacrifice. Might as well end up with people who understand what that word truly means." He promised to honor my wife's memory. Loretta's name would be on a small brass plaque by the door. "In memory of love that endured," it would read. That was enough for me. I handed him the keys and didn't look back. When I returned to the cabin, the air around Lake Juniper carried that early winter stillness, crisp and clean, like the world itself had paused to take a breath. I brewed a pot of coffee and stepped out onto the porch. The steam rose in the cold morning air, swirling like incense, and for the first time in years, I felt nothing pulling at me. No guilt, no anger, no noise. Just peace. I sat there watching the reflection of the sunrise ripple across the lake, the orange light spilling over the water like grace itself. My hands, rough and scarred from decades of work, wrapped around the mug, steady and sure. This was what freedom looked like, not wealth, not victory, but quiet mornings and a clean conscience. The phone buzzed on the table beside me. It was a text from Marcus. "Can I come by today?" No explanation. No apology. Just a question stripped down to its simplest truth. I didn't answer right away. I let the silence stretch, letting God speak to me through it. Finally, I typed back 2 words. "You can." He arrived just after noon. The gravel crunched under his tires, slow and cautious, like he was approaching sacred ground. When he stepped out of the car, I almost didn't recognize him. The arrogance was gone. He looked older, thinner, his shoulders lower, his eyes clearer. Humility had finally done what lectures never could. "Dad," he said softly. Not Pop, not old man, just Dad. It landed different this time, heavy, sincere. I nodded toward the porch. "Coffee's hot," I said. He followed me up, moving like a man who'd walked a long road and wasn't sure if he'd reached the end or the beginning. We sat in silence for a while, the kind of silence that doesn't demand filling. The lake stretched out before us, calm and endless. "You gave the house away?" he finally said, his voice low. I nodded. "Didn't need it anymore. Someone else did." He looked down, his hands clasped tightly. "I don't know if I'll ever earn back what I lost," he murmured. "Maybe not," I said. "But maybe that's not the point." He turned toward me, confusion softening into something like understanding. I took another sip of coffee before I spoke again. "You see, son, life's not about keeping what's yours. It's about learning when to give it up so it can mean something to someone else. That's the difference between having and living." He didn't respond right away. His jaw tightened, and I saw tears glinting in his eyes, though he blinked them back. "I didn't know how much I took for granted," he said quietly. "I didn't know how much you carried." "I know," I said. "That's what growing up really is, realizing who built the ground you stand on." I paused, then added, "And realizing you almost burned it down." He let out a shaky breath that turned into a small broken laugh. "Guess you raised a slow learner." "Maybe," I said, smiling faintly, "but a learner all the same." We sat there until the sun began to dip the sky, melting into shades of amber and deep red. The kind of sunset Loretta loved. I could almost hear her voice in the breeze, that soft hum she used to make while hanging laundry outside. It felt like she was there watching us, nodding. Marcus stood finally, walking toward the edge of the dock. He looked out at the water for a long time before saying, "I've been volunteering down at the Veterans Center, the one you donated to." I turned my head slowly, studying him. "You have?" He nodded. "Yeah. They needed help fixing the plumbing, rebuilding the back steps. I figured I owed someone more than words." A strange warmth filled my chest. Not pride exactly, but something deeper. "Good," I said. "That's a start." He walked back toward me, his hand trembling just slightly before he reached out. I took it. His grip was firm, steady, and familiar. It felt like the closing of a circle that had taken too long to draw. When he drove away later, I didn't feel the old ache that used to follow him. I felt something lighter, like release. I watched his car disappear down the dirt road until the sound of the engine faded into the wind. That night the stars came out early. I sat by the window, the Bible open beside me, the same verse I'd read the day I left that house, still marked, "Be still, and know that I am God." I finally understood it. Stillness wasn't about doing nothing. It was about knowing when to stop fighting. As the moon rose over the lake, its reflection rippling across the surface like a second chance, I whispered a prayer, not for myself, but for my son. For the man he was becoming, and the boy he used to be. The cabin was quiet, the world at peace, and for the first time since Loretta's passing, I felt whole. I set my mug down, leaned back, and closed my eyes. Tomorrow would come, and with it the ordinary beauty of life, work to do, coffee to pour, forgiveness to practice. And though I'd never say it out loud, I knew deep down I had my son back. Not the one who betrayed me, but the one Loretta always believed he could be. And that more than revenge or redemption was the true miracle. Life has a way of teaching us that peace doesn't always come from holding on. It often comes from letting go. The story reminds us that forgiveness isn't about forgetting the pain someone caused, but about freeing ourselves from it. True strength lies not in revenge or pride, but in grace, the quiet kind that restores dignity without shouting. We learn that love, when tested by betrayal, can still choose wisdom over bitterness. And sometimes the greatest gift a parent can give is not money or comfort, but the example of courage, humility, and faith. For those of us who've lived long enough to see both the beauty and the heartbreak of family, this story is a reminder. What we build with integrity lasts longer than what we lose to pride. If this message touched your heart, take a moment to reflect on someone you've forgiven or someone you need to. Leave a comment below sharing your thoughts, and don't forget to subscribe for more powerful life stories that honor wisdom, justice, and grace.